To understand the moment we are living in, you need someone who has lived every layer of the story. Columbia University and Princeton trained historian, IDF paratrooper serving in the 1982 Lebanon War, Israel's ambassador to the United States from 2009 to 2013, member of Knesset and deputy minister in the Prime Minister's office, where he directly influenced Israel's strategic doctrine. One of Israel's most important strategic thinkers, best-selling historian whose works like 6 Days of War, Power, Faith, and Fantasy, and Ally have won international prizes, academic awards, and recognition from scholars across the political spectrum. Senior fellow at leading institutes, lecturer at Yale, Harvard, and Georgetown, and one of Israel's most respected strategic minds, holder of 4 honorary doctorates. Named by Politico as one of the 50 most influential thinkers in America, by the Forward as one of the 5 most influential Jews in America, and by the Jerusalem Post as one of the 10 most influential Jews worldwide. He is the rare voice who combines statecraft, scholarship, and soldiering. Someone who has written the story of the Middle East, shaped the policy behind it, and fought on the ground where it unfolded. For anyone trying to understand a region in turmoil or a Jewish world standing at a historical crossroads, there are few guides more authoritative or more essential than Ambassador Michael Oren. Ambassador, the Ayatollah has no clothes. Maduro is in American custody. October 7 fractured old assumptions. Turkey's President Erdogan wants to replace Iran and encircle Israel. Europe has yet to wake from its slumber. America is suffering an identity crisis. The UN risks irrelevance. Or as Nikki Haley correctly said, the United Nations has become a place where dictatorships come to scold democracies. Gaza, Russia, China, and of course, anti-Semitism. Half a century, we've had a kind of US-Israel alliance that rested on a broad bipartisan consensus. That consensus now appears unstable. America remains Israel's most important ally, but it is also politically divided, culturally polarized, and uncertain about its role in the world. Is the American narrative about Israel undergoing a permanent shift? And if so, what does that mean for the long-term foundations of the US-Israel alliance?
Do you remind me to respond to all of those, Jimmy, or just to the last one?
I wanted to put on the table the troubles facing us today.
There are a lot of troubles. There's also a lot of non-troubles.
Yes.
I would say, before we get into the, to the nitty-gritty of the U.S.'s relations and the way it's transforming, that Israel now, from a historical perspective, is in unquestionably the best geostrategic situation it's ever known since our creation in 1948. Keep in mind, the Middle East today looks profoundly, utterly different than it did on the 6th of October, 2023. Israel is now engaged in negotiations with Lebanon, engaged in negotiations with Syria. The Assad regime has fallen. Hamas has been degraded to a fraction of what it was. And Iran, which was the regional hegemon on the 6th of October, 2023, is truly a very pale simulacrum of what it was. It has lost Lebanon, lost Syria, lost Venezuela, and has been humiliated and rendered vulnerable by the United States and Israel. So I can't think of any other time in our history. This is all, of course, in addition to the peace with Egypt, peace with Jordan, peace with 4 signatory countries to the Abraham Accords. If you had told me, I moved to Israel close to half century ago. If you told me this would be our situation today, I would say, you're certifiably insane. So let's begin by saying what's good, that Israel has won what is unquestionably, and now I'm saying not as a former ambassador, but a former history professor, military history, Israel has won the greatest single military victory in modern history, perhaps in all history, and I can go into great detail and explain to you exactly why they'll be studying this war at West Point for 50 to 100 years to come, because it is that type of victory. We're in very, very different situation. Now, having said all that, everything you mentioned is true. I wouldn't take issue with any of it. And among the many transformations you did list was what's going on internally in the United States. We can add to that what's going on internally in Israel, and whether the U.S.-Israel relationship, as we've known it, for the last 5 decades is going through, again, some type of permanent change. Permanent change. And I'm a historian, as I mentioned. I have enough trouble predicting the past. I can't tell you what's going to happen in the future, but I would say that Israel, in any case, has to prepare for that change. That the United States, the Democrats, and the Republicans alike sometimes vie with which party is more isolationist, which party wants to focus on America first, and tremendous anti-Semitism, as you mentioned, both on the left and the right now. The bipartisan support for Israel has largely broken down today, with also erosion occurring within the Republican Party. So we have to prepare ourselves and be responsible for possible changes. I've been a longtime advocate of achieving independence from the United States in terms of foreign aid. I wrote the first article calling for the end of American military aid to Israel back in 2021 in Tablet magazine. I was the only member of the Israeli government in 2016 to oppose President Obama's memorandum of understanding, the 10-year, $40 billion aid package. I was opposed to it. I think many Israelis understand now why. I came under a lot of criticism at the time, but now I think most people, including the prime minister, agree with me that we have to wean ourselves of that aid. And that is part of the process of.
And I believe that's happening right now. Is that correct? I think Bibi has just put that across to the Americans that we're going to start to wean our way away from American military assistance. Is that my understanding?
It is. He's talking about a 10-year reduction process. I tend to agree with Senator Lindsey Graham, who said that it should be faster than that. I do think it should be faster than that. I think it's in the mutual interests of both our countries. And I can go into detail and explain why. But let's just begin with the fact that Israel is an affluent, strong, independent country, and it is no longer consonant with our status to be accepting handouts, what amounts to handouts from the United States. And it exposes us to all sorts of pressures. It's not a good deal. We should be in a partnership with the United States in areas of mutual strategic interests like cyber and laser technology, certainly intelligence. So it's a different point. But we do have to prepare for the fact that the United States may not be there the way we have known the United States to be there in the past. We can't bank on that. Look, with all that's going on in the MAGA movement, with criticism of President Trump's involvement in foreign affairs in Ukraine and Venezuela, Nigeria now, and of course in the Middle East, he continues to be very much involved, saying that the United States will exercise military options against Iran if the regime keeps on shooting the protesters there. So that's really going against the grain. It's showing that America is still the ally we have known for these decades and still willing to use military force, to defend its interests in the Middle East. And we happen to be one of those interests, I think probably the primary interest. So we can't rush ahead. Having said all that, yes, we should diversify our foreign policy portfolio, develop closer relationships with countries that are interested in having closer relations with us, such as Argentina and India, for example. So that's the beginning of my responding to that very long list of
Appreciate it.
changing that you mentioned. I'll be happy to go on to the rest of them too.
Sure. If we go a little bit deeper into anti-Semitism, as you said, it's moved in from the margins. You alluded that it's moved from the margins into elite universities and the cultural institutions and parts of mainstream political discourse. Israel is no longer framed primarily as a democracy under threat, but as a moral offender inside a broader ideological story in different ways by the radical left on the one side and on the other by the likes of Candace Owen and Tucker Carlson. Do you see the ideological anti-Semitism as a temporary phenomenon or driven by campuses and social media, or a deeper cultural realignment that will shape how the next generation understands Israel and the Jewish people?
And the answer to all those questions is yes. It's, as they used to say on the SATs, it's D, all of the above. Why D, all of the above? Let's begin with now 8 decades after the Holocaust. The Holocaust has been forgotten or being forgotten. During that period, anti-Semitism was considered unsavory. It is no longer the case. Our means of fighting anti-Semitism was to expose the anti-Semites, shame the anti-Semites, and re-educate the anti-Semites. None of that works anymore. You don't have to expose the anti-Semites. They're marching in the streets. You're not going to humiliate them. They're proud of being anti-Semites. and you're certainly not going to re-educate them. So that old modus vivendi is not going to work anymore. And the world is basically reverted to form. It's reverted to the world that my grandparents, certainly my great parents knew, essentially anti-Semitic world. And I say world, I say that carefully because it's not the world. It's not 1.4 billion Hindus. It's not millions of Chinese. Same thing. It's basically in the West, and not in all of the West. We have some very good friends in the West, but certainly among young people, certainly very educated liberal people. There is a tremendous erosion in support for Israel and an openness to the type of anti-Semitism you find both on the left-wing variety and the right-wing variety. So that is certainly true. The universities play a big role in this. And there, the issue is not the leadership of the universities, the presidents, the heads of departments. It's the actual faculty themselves. And you're not going to get rid of the tenure system so fast, but simply put, if you have a professor who thinks that Israel is lower than the ninth circle of hell, and when that professor comes to retire, he's going to find somebody, he or she going to find someone who's going to replace him who thinks exactly like they do. And so that perpetuates itself. And so presidents and provosts come and go, but these professors and their tenure staffs are permanent. And universities are going to turn out people, particularly the better universities are going to turn out people who are going to get into leadership positions, both in the media, in the government, and corporations. And it's going to be a problem. And I'm going to caution you, as I said, the world is not the United States and Europe, but neither are the universities all the same. There are about 4,000 campuses in the United States. And the major anti-Israel protests took place on about 60 of them, a small percentage of them. So keep in mind, yes, they are some of the better universities, but having said that, they don't represent all of American academia. But we're going to have to deal with that issue as well. I know for someone who I'm on the press all the time, and I'm interviewing with some very tough stations around the world. I would say that 90% of the questions that I encounter have lurking behind them some anti-Semitic trope that Israeli Jews wake up in the morning and think nothing else but the way to kill Palestinian children and women and innocent people. That's right out of the Middle Ages, right out of the blood libels of the Middle Ages. And like Jews are incapable of just defending themselves because we have to defend themselves. We have to be seeking justice and seeking blood. Very deeply ingrained in Western consciousness. And again, 80 years after the Holocaust, it's resurfacing. Will it go back, into the bottle, as it were? Again, I don't know. I'm not a prophet, but we have to prepare for a world where anti-Semitism is a reality the way it was before World War II.
Yeah, so you don't seem to probably agree then, I guess, with some estimations that further regional normalization through the expansion of the Abraham Accords might eventually soften or neutralize the anti-Israel sentiment in the West, it seems.
No, I do not. I think the anti-Israel sentiment in the West is not about what we do anymore. It's about who we are. And we are the Jewish state. And as a Jewish state, we'll be treated not just to a double standard, we'll be held to an utterly different standard than any other country in the world, which is why, according to the IRA definition of anti-Semitism, which says that holding Israel to a different standard that you would hold any other democracy is fundamentally anti-Semitic. The answer, of course, is yes. Going back to those campus protests, these campus protests were all about Israel and Palestine. By the way, none of those campus protests were in favor of a two-state solution. No one said the word peace did not appear on any of these posters. They're all about Israel's dissolution. But did you see any protests about the Russian invasion of Ukraine? Do you see any campus protests about the genocide, the true genocide in Sudan, or the disastrous civil war, 500,000 Syrians killed, 250,000 Yemenis killed? No, it's only about the Jewish state, which by definition is anti-Semitic.
It's a great segue to discuss the European landscape. I want to frame it, though. We're witnessing beyond Europe the return of civilizational politics. The neo-Ottoman Turkey is projecting power from the Eastern Mediterranean to the Caucasus. Iran is attempting, so far, thank God, with limited success, to conduct a transnational militia empire, and Putin's Russia has abandoned Cold War pretense in favor of open imperial revival. So in such a world, Europe should really understand, perhaps better than any other region, why Israel indeed does matter. Yet Europe's political discourse toward Israel has grown colder and quite hostile. And the deeper problem may not be hostility, but a kind of historical amnesia with Europe itself. Europe appears to have forgotten its own history, how fragile civilizations can be. And with that, it seems to be missing the big picture, not seeing Israel as the friend and ally that it is.
Europe's problem is not Israel. Europe's problem is Europe, and that a very large segment of European societies, not all of them, and certainly we can't say it's all we're going to say the same in the future as different political movements come to the fore in Europe. But Europe's problem is that Europeans have no idea who they are. Um, it's widely forgotten. About 15 years ago, the European Union had a debate, had a vote whether to cite Christianity as one of the sources
Yes.
of European identity. If you remember this,
Yes,
they voted
yes.
it down. So 1,500 years of European history of Christendom was thrown out the window, replaced by amorphous terms like progressivism and progress and modernity and liberalism, and no one can really define these terms, and no one's going to go out to fight for these terms. No one's going to die for
Hmm.
progressivism, right? And
Right.
you're up against enemies who are actually willing to die for what they believe. And so Europe, you can't expect Europe to defend Israel if Europe's not unwilling to defend itself. And I've been reading a wonderful book lately by Paul Kingsnorth called Against the Machine, and I would recommend it highly. But he makes the case that the West is not dying, the West is dead,
Mm.
because the West lost what he calls the four P's, which are prayer, place,
Mm.
peoplehood.
Mm.
And prayer, place, I gotta be all four of them now. Ready?
Mm.
It's
Mm.
late night.
Yeah.
Prayer, place, peoplehood, and the past.
In the
And
past.
they gave up on the four P's in order to get the four S's, which is science, sex,
Mm.
screens, and I don't know, it's something to do with money.
Mhm,
And
mhm.
and it's interesting because Israel has the four P's. We have peoplehood, we have prayer, we have the past, we have place. We believe in our homeland, and we're willing to defend that homeland. Because we have the four P's, we have those four. And for us, retaining the four P's doesn't mean we give up or forfeit the four S's. We got those too. We certainly
I
have
would
some.
I would argue, I'm sure maybe that's his argument too, that it's because we have that we can move forward and be so
Well,
successful in
he
all
doesn't
these
mention
areas.
Israel anywhere in his book, but I think it's the most Zionist book I've ever
Mm.
read that
Mhm,
way. It's
mhm,
actually
mhm,
explaining why Israel works.
mhm,
Why is it during this past war you have something in the order of 400,000 Israelis picking up guns and going out to defend their families, leaving their jobs, leaving their homes for hundreds of days, knowing what the dangers were? And 400,000 Israelis, proportionally speaking, would be the equivalent of something like 22 million Americans. That's significantly more Americans than fought in all of World War II, and certainly more than any European country would willing to devote to their own defense. Yeah, there's a reason why this country works, and there's a reason why why the citizen of this country is willing to defend the country, in spite of very deep internal divisions within the state of Israel, which is quite extraordinary. So we would, I think, present Europe with a lesson, with a paradigm of how to succeed as a nation state in the 21st century. We can reconcile East with West. We can reconcile modernity with tradition. We can reconcile democracy with a nation at arms. All these things that the Europeans think are somehow contradictory. We can show them that it can work, but only if the Europeans actually want to survive in some way. And as harsh as the Trump administration's recent assessment of Europe was, and probably read it, uh, it's very difficult to gainsay to say that they're not wrong. Now we have to see what happens in various movements. Say the now Farage movement in Britain, which is now very much leading in the polls there, which wants to bring Britain back to something the way it was 50, 60, 70 years ago. Movements in France, movements in Germany. They're not without difficulty. Some of them have fascist pasts, and we have to be very cognizant and sensitive to that. But they're very different than the Europeans who simply want to disappear and think that, or are supportive of a historic alliance between radical Islam and extreme leftism.
It reminds me of a quote. I can't remember the author's name. The book was "Is It Tomorrow Yet?" He said, Europe behaves as if history is over while history is returning everywhere else. Ivan something.
Not got me.
Um, yeah. Um, so I actually wanted to turn to Iran with the time we have. Ambassador, over the past several weeks, we've witnessed unprecedented wave of protests across nearly every province of Iran. These demonstrations began with economic grievances, inflation, currency collapse, and everyday hardship, but quickly evolved into broad public rejection of the clerical regime, with human rights groups reporting hundreds, some even saying thousands of deaths, arrests, as the security apparatus there responds with deadly force. From a strategic and historical perspective, how should we think about this moment inside Iran, not just as unrest, but as maybe a crisis of the regime's legitimacy in general, but and what does it mean for Israel moving forward?
Okay, so let's begin with what it means for Iran. That I believe that these disturbances, as widespread and as violent they are, does not mean that the regime is on the verge of collapse or being overthrown. The regime has not begun to truly crack down on these protests, and it has at its disposal an army of about 500,000 soldiers. The Iranian Revolutionary Guards can have over 500,000 men under arms. The Besiege, which is a paramilitary organization, has as many as 5 million paramilitary troops. So you're talking about something in the finish of 1.5 million troops who can come out, and they have 5.5 million troops who can come out to the streets and begin to suppress these people. Um, and the protests are very large indeed, but keep in mind this is a country of 90 million people. So what percentage of that population is actually going out in the streets? So I don't think the regime is going to fall immediately because of this. I could be wrong, but I would tend to doubt it. But having said that, the regime's days are numbered. We say this because, again, I go back to what I said earlier. The Iranian hegemon of 6th of October 2023 is never coming back. They have lost Lebanon, they've lost Syria, they've lost Gaza, they've lost Venezuela. They've been, shown to be vulnerable and humiliated by Israel and the United States. They're a pale, pale, pale shadow of what they were, and they're not coming back. So, having said that's not the same Iran. Whether the United States will intervene, I don't know. I tend to take President Trump as his word at this point. I think anybody who doesn't is
Hmm.
not looking at recent
Not paying
history.
attention, yes.
But it may take a while. My gut feeling, Demi, is that there's going to be negotiations. There are probably negotiations going on right now. And those negotiations would look something like this with senior members of the IRGC who are going to say to Mr. Trump, well, you can pull a Maduro here. All right, we can get rid of some of the bad guys, get rid of the bad mullahs, which is probably redundant. I don't know if there's a good mullah.
Hmm.
And we will give you preferential status in terms of Iranian oil, which would be amazing for the United States and, economically speaking, but also strategically because the Chinese are almost entirely dependent on Iranian oil. Imagine America gaining control of that oil supply. Oh boy. Now for Israel, it wouldn't be ideal, but it would be certainly better than anything that existed before. And to have Iran back in America's orbit, out of Chinese orbit, out of Russia's orbit, depends how America plays this. Indeed. At this point, rather skeptical. Just
Do,
skeptical. Not going to rule it
do you
out
think
that the
that
United
would
States will intervene.
sorry, Ambassador. I was going to say, do you think if that were to happen, that would remove the Iranian nuclear threat and ballistic missile threat, which is apparently on par in terms of its danger to Israel?
Well, that would be the part of the negotiations. I don't think Trump is going to sign an agreement. I hope not. That
Hmm.
allows Iran to retain its highly enriched uranium stockpile, or to retain most of its long-range ballistic missiles. Now, you should know that the Israeli government met in emergency session tonight, and again, it's a gut feeling that emergency session was about the uh, the news that has been received rather, confidentially by the Israeli government that the negotiations are already going on, and Israel has to feel that its interests are being taken into consideration in those negotiations.
Thank you. There's so much to talk about. Ambassador Oren, I just want to thank you. Your life bridges scholarship, battlefield clarity, diplomatic realism, and Jewish historical memory all in one. And I think few people have seen the map of our world from as many angles as you, and fewer can still explain it with clarity and depth the way you can. So, Ambassador Oren, thank you for joining us on Echoes of Jewish History.
Thank you, Jimmy. And be reminded, the historical perspective is important. If you look at Israel's history over the last 77 years, with all the difficulties, all the war, all the tragedies, October 7th et al., you can't come away without being optimistic, because the arc of Israeli history certainly bends toward greater security, greater prosperity, and greater peace.
Thank you. Thank you. Amen to that. Be well.
Amen.
Shabbat
Take
shalom.
care. Be
Take care.
well. Take care. Bye.